Throughout my time in colonial Williamsburg, in a way, it really felt like I was walking through 18th century Williamsburg. There is a lot of work that colonial Williamsburg has done over the decades to create this feeling as a guest walks through their museum. They have created and perfected an important balance between modern comfort and a colonial aesthetic, and they have gone through great lengths in order to hide the necessary modern infrastructure that keeps their guests comfortable in order to emulate that colonial feel. In this video, I'm going to go over a few examples of how I noticed colonial Williamsburg emulates the colonial feel while maintaining modern comfort for their guests. First, let's talk about one of the more obvious examples of modern comfort with a colonial feel: air conditioning. Virginia is hot. People would simply not come to colonial Williamsburg if they had to spend hours out of their day in colonial buildings with no AC. This is why, in colonial Williamsburg, the majority of the buildings do have AC. They're just very well hidden. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any pictures of the AC units themselves, but that's all part of the Williamsburg magic. They made sure to hide any trace of an AC system by having AC units stored away in closets and vents that are camouflaged well into the rooms. If there were visible AC units outside of the houses, like there are with modern houses, do you feel that it would ruin the aesthetic of the well-planted and gardened backyards? Similarly, if there were visible vents in rooms, would it take away from the colonial decorating? Let's look at this room, for example. If amongst these muskets and swords there was a large, unsightly vent, do you feel that it would take away from the aesthetic? I sure do, and that's why Williamsburg has gone to the lengths to hide these modern features. Next, I'm going to talk about a detail that most people probably would not notice during their time staying in colonial Williamsburg: the road infrastructure. If you were walking through colonial Williamsburg, enjoying all the colonial shops, all the colonial trades, and everything that comes with the museum, and all of a sudden you had to wait to cross a major street with cars traveling 35 miles an hour and over, it wouldn't feel very authentic, would it? Well, believe it or not, running directly under certain parts of colonial Williamsburg, including the grounds that you see in the picture here, there is a major street where cars are traveling over 35 miles an hour. Now, instead of taking the easy and cheap route of running the street directly through colonial Williamsburg, they built the tunnel that you see here. Now, this tunnel was certainly more expensive to build, but Williamsburg wanted their guests not to be exposed to the sight of a major street or the noise and potential danger that would come with it. This is a very important factor in maintaining the colonial feel while providing modern comfort to Williamsburg's guests. During my time in colonial Williamsburg, one of the things that fascinated me the most were the subtle hints of modern infrastructure, such as speakers, lights, wires, water fountains, and others. In a modern city, you'll generally see large wooden poles all over the place that serve the purpose of moving electric from one area to another. In colonial Williamsburg, the vast majority of these electrical wires are underground, completely out of sight. But certain amenities, such as lights and speakers, require these wires to come out of ground. Now, in colonial Williamsburg, instead of building large wooden poles like many other cities would do, they simply built the electrical lines, lights, and speakers into trees, as you can see in these pictures. Doing this eliminates the risk of sacrificing the colonial aesthetic. Also, any tourists, especially in the Virginia heat, will expect drinking fountains throughout the streets. However, a standard white porcelain drinking fountain would look out of place in a museum that is attempting to emulate an 18th century town. To work around this, colonial Williamsburg built their drinking fountains into things that people are more likely to see in an 18th century town, such as barrels, as you can see in this example. As we've seen through these three examples, colonial Williamsburg has created a perfect balance between colonial aesthetic and modern comfort.